So we're on our next rounding lesson now, and we're going to recap what we did in the last video, which was rounding a number to the nearest 10, 100 or 1,000. And then we're going to move on to this bit here, round a decimal to the nearest whole number. Okay, so first of all, let's recap rounding to the nearest 10, 100 and 1,000. I'm going to write down a few different numbers, excuse me, and then we're going to round them, okay? So 341, 29, 6,048, 721, and 1,342. Okay. So we're going to round these. First of all, we're going to round all of them to the nearest 10, okay? So we're going to do that in green, all right? So to the nearest 10 is going to be in green. And then we're going to look at nearest 100 and nearest 1,000. So the nearest 10, remember what I've asked you to do is pick out the tens digit, okay? So in this one, the tens digit is the 4. 4 stands for 40, 4 tens. So that's what we need for this one. And then we look at the 1 to help us understand whether the 4 stays as a 4 and makes it 340, or whether it moves up 1 to a 5 and makes it 350. And remember, our rule was that if the number following is a 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4, we round down and leave the number as it is. But if it's a 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, we move it up to the next number in the 10 times table. So because 1 is in this set of numbers here, then we leave the 4 as it is, and our answer is 340. Okay, actually. So now I want to just erase. Now let me see if I can do this. No, it's not going to work. I won't draw that back in. So, next one. We're going to round 29 to the nearest 10, okay? So we look at our tens digit, that's 20, that's the 2. And the 9 tells us what to do with it. So, we look, our 9 is here, and it tells us to round up the way. So, 29 is in between 20 and 30, but the fact that it's a 9 tells us it's closer to 30, so we need to move this up 1, and we get 30 for our answer there. Okay, the next number, 6,048, so we're here now. So we look for the tens digit, because we're rounding to the nearest 10, and we underline the tens digit. We circle the one that follows it, and we understand that 8 tells us to round the 4 up. Okay, so the 6,048 is in between 6,040 and 6,050, and the 8 tells us it's closer to 6,050. We're going to now round 721 to the nearest 10. So we underline the tens digit, 721. We circle the 1. The 1 tells us to leave the 2 as meaning 20. We don't need to move it up to 30. So then we've got 720 for our answer. And remember, when you look at your answer, it should make sense. It should be close to the number that you started with. Okay? If, for example, we'd missed the 0 off there by accident, then that 72 wouldn't be anything like an approximation for 721. Okay, so we do definitely need that 0 in. And the last one that we're going to round to the nearest 10 is 1,342. So the tens digit is the 4, and the 2 tells us to leave the 4 alone. So it's going to be 1,340. And remember, that 0 on the end is super important. Right, we're going to look at rounding some of these numbers to the nearest 100 and some to the nearest 1,000. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all is in pink, we're going to round 2 of these to the nearest 100. So we're going to start with 29. Here, we're going to round 29 to the nearest 100. Okay, so our hundreds digit in 29, how many hundreds have we got? Well, our hundreds digit would be there, wouldn't it? So we haven't actually got any hundreds. So we've got no hundreds in 29. And then the 2 tells us to leave the 0 as it is. We don't move it up 1. So actually, 29 to the nearest 100 is just 0. Because remember, our choices would be 0 or 100 if we're looking at the 100 times table. And 29 is closer to 0 than it is to 100. Okay, we're going to round the last one here, 1,342 to the nearest 100. So if we look at our hundreds digit, say it out loud again, 342. So the 3 is the hundreds digit. The 4 tells us to leave the 3 as it is. So it's going to be 1,300. Not 1,400. Okay. Then we're going to look at rounding to the nearest 1,000. And we're going to do that in black. Okay. So we're going to round each of the 3 that are left to the nearest 1,000. So looking at the first one, 341. Where's the thousands digit in 341? Well, it'll be here, won't it? There's no thousands. Okay. And the 3 tells us to leave it at no thousands. So if we're rounding 341 to the nearest 1,000, it is just 0. Because if you think about 0 to 1,000, 341 is round about here. It's less than halfway, so it's closer to 0 than it is to 1,000. Okay, we're going to look at 6,048 now. We're going to round 6,048 to the nearest 1,000. Okay, so we look for our thousands digit, which is the 6. And the 0 tells us to leave the 6 as it is. So remember, these are an amount of thousands. So it's 6,000. Okay, I'm going to add one more onto the end. 4,762, and we're going to round this to the nearest 1,000 again. So if we say that number out loud, 4,762, so that's the thousands digit. That's the one that tells us what to do. So because 7 is in this section, then it's telling us to round up. So that, in other words, means that 4,762 is closer to 5,000 than it is to 4,000. If you think about 4,000 and 5,000, 4,762 will be about there. Okay. Now we're going to look at rounding to the nearest whole number. Okay. Now, if we're rounding to the nearest whole number, the whole numbers are the counting numbers. All right. There's no fractions and there's no decimals in those. So we need to be thinking about what kind of numbers would we have to start with if we were rounding them to the nearest whole number. So if we're rounding to the nearest whole number, our answers will be things like 36 or 452 or 17 or 2. Okay, so they're going to be the answers. So we're not going to have any decimals. We are not rounding to the nearest 10 or 100 or 1,000, but we are just going to round to the nearest whole number. Okay, so if we think of a number line, if we just have a look at 36 in the middle of a number line, then what numbers are either side of 36? Well, if 35 is here, then 37 will be there, won't it? Because our counting numbers are 35, 36, 37. So for a number to be rounded to 36, to the nearest whole number, what that means is it needs to be closer to 36 than it is to 35, and closer to 36 than it is to 37. So where I've just kind of coloured in that number line, they're the numbers that would round to give us 36. Okay, but what could those numbers be? Let's think about a number that's really close to 36 here. What number might that be? Well, we're looking at decimals, aren't we? So it would have to be 35 point, and that might be 0.8, or it might be 35.9. Difficult to say, really, isn't it? Or we could look round about here. There's a number that would also round to 36, and that one is 36.4. Okay, so the kind of numbers that round to whole numbers don't start off as whole numbers, they start off as decimals. Okay, so draw a line there, and we're going to look at how we round whole to the nearest whole number. Let's start with 13.7. Okay, we're going to round that to the nearest whole number. So we do exactly the same process as we have used before. You identify the digit that is the nearest whole number digit, so that would be your units. Okay, you look at the number after it, and that tells you whether you leave this as a 3 or move it up to a 4. Now remember, 13.7 is in between 13 and 14. So 13 and 14 are our two choices for our answer. And remember, the 7 tells you to round up, so it's 14. Okay, so if you round 13.7 to the nearest whole number, it's closer to 14 than it is to 13. Okay, when you're rounding to the nearest whole number, you should not have a decimal point, and you should not have any decimal places. That means any numbers after the decimal point. Okay, let's look at 251.379. Okay, so we're rounding to the nearest whole number, so we need to identify our units digit, which is the 1. Okay, it's always the 1. If you're rounding to the nearest whole number, it's always the digit just in front of the decimal point. So we look at the 3, and because the 3 tells you to leave the number as it is, you don't round up with a 3, so we leave it at 251. And remember what we've talked about before, any digits that come after this 3, they're not relevant to the rounding at all. Okay, it's only the 3 that we use for the rounding. All right, if we've got 409.703 or 703, then we're rounding it to the nearest whole number. So we look at our whole numbers, our units digit. We consider this 7 that tells us to round up. So we move the 9 up 1. So remember, this 9, though, is part of 409. So if we're moving it up 1, we're moving it up to 410. Okay, and remember, no decimal points, no digits after the decimal point. Okay, so try another one. Okay, so 3024.039. So we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So we look at the units digit. We consider the one that follows that, the 0, and that tells us to leave the 4 as it is. So all we're doing is 3024. So I hope you can see that these are not tricky to do. All you're doing is identifying the units digit, which is the one straight in front of the decimal point. Decide whether that's staying as it is or moving up 1, and the next digit along tells you that, and then you just write it as a whole number. So we'll do one more for practice. So we'll do 634.252. Okay, so our units digit, because we want to round to the nearest whole number, there's the units digit. There's the 2 that's going to tell us what we're going to do. So the 2 tells us to leave the 4 as it is. So it's just 634. So not too tricky there, I hope you think. Right, so what I'd like you to do just now then is pause the video, and I'm going to get you to round each of these numbers to the nearest whole number. Okay, so we'll do a couple of them together, and then I'll leave you to get on with the rest of them. So we're going to do the first one, 15.32. So same process each time for rounding to the nearest whole number, please. So we underline our units digit. We circle the one that follows it. The 3 tells you to leave the 5 as it is. So the answer to this one is 15. So remember that 15.32 is in between 15 and 16, but it's closer to 15. So 15 is our answer. Okay, and we're going to pick one other one. We'll do the 987.65. We'll do this one here, G. Okay, so our units digit, rounding to the nearest whole number, units, is 7. And the 6 tells us that we need to round the 7 up to the next number along. So instead of 987, we'll have 988. Okay, you have a go at the rest of these just now. Pause the video, answer the questions, and then you get the answers in a minute. So here are your answers. Pause the video again. Check all your answers. Make sure you're correct. And then, if you've got any time left in this lesson, you can go back through the worksheets and complete all the questions from exercises 1, 2 and 3, because in the last video you weren't necessarily doing all the questions. So if you make sure you have done all of those, so you've had a really good practice at rounding to the nearest 10, 100 and 1,000 and to the nearest whole number, then you'll be in a really great position for our tutorial this week. Okay, so well done for your hard work, and me or your maths teacher, if that's not me, are really looking forward to seeing how you get on. See you later.